Let's just take Tucker Carlson. Suddenly, in a very short period of time, a switch is flipped and he has a completely different worldview and his ideological base has completely changed. What happened? I don't know. Is it that it is more profitable for him to do what he's doing now than what he was doing when he was at Fox News? He wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't.
What is next for Hamas? Well, let's hear this interview with American Ambassador to Israel, Mr. Mike Huckabee, as he's interviewed of not only what's next for Hamas, but about the Israel and USA alliance.
I want to start on the left. And what we're seeing with the election of Zoran Mandani in New York is this fusion on the one hand with Marxism and also anti-Semitism. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you think is going on the left and how we work to try to combat that.
Well, let's get real clear that what we're dealing with is Jew hatred. If we use the word anti-Semitism outside of our own circle, we certainly can use it here. It always leads to a level of ambiguity. If we just say, look, this is Jew hatred, why do people hate Jews? The real answer is a spiritual one. That may be offensive to some people, but when people hate God, they're naturally going to hate people who throughout history, from the time on Mount Moriah right here in this city, have represented the ones that God first spoke to in a very personal and real way and said, you're going to take this message, you're going to create this magnificent land, and through you, the world is going to be blessed. Well, now, if you don't believe there's a God, or you want to believe that you are your own God, or that the environment is your God, you'd rather worship the creation rather than the creator. If you reject basic spiritual premises because you had rather live in a secular world that denies the very existence of God, then your first target is naturally going to be Jews. Now, what Christians have to understand is the next target is going to be them. And that's why I often try to remind people, like it or not, we are in this together. And I hope that people will come to understand that the root of Jew hatred is, in fact, not political, it is not economic, it is spiritual.
I think many of the people here saw what was happening on the political left for a long time, and we're very sad to see how the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and the American left just slid away from Israel. And I think people were much more surprised, specifically since October 7th, to see what's happening on the right side of the political spectrum, this sort of American firstism, this fusion of libertarianism, isolationism. And like I said, I think that a lot of people have been surprised by it. Why do you think it's metastasized so quickly? And what do you think are the talking points that people in this room can use to sort of combat it and maybe control the damage?
It's grown very rapidly because it's profitable. Let's not kid ourselves. There's money to be made by being a contrarian. There's money to be made by being divisive and provocative. I don't know if all of these loud voices are doing it solely for money, and I cannot tell you where the money comes from. I wish I could. If I could, I would tell you. But it doesn't make sense. Let's just take Tucker Carlson, that a man in his mid-50s, who I've known since 1991 when his first job out of college was in Little Rock, Arkansas, working for a newspaper. I worked with him for 6.5 years at Fox News in New York. Suddenly, in a very short period of time, a switch is flipped and he has a completely different worldview and his ideological base has completely changed. That's not normal for someone in his 50s. It just isn't. What happened? I don't know. Is it that it is more profitable for him to do what he's doing now than what he was doing when he was at Fox News? He wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't. There's got to be, on all of our part, a willingness to push back, stand up, speak up, but to do it with facts, but to do it not with a sense of anger and hostility. I think that's a huge mistake. If all we do is engage in the same level of temperature, then we're not going to be able to be successful. We need to calmly, but with a sense of assurance and confidence, push back on some of the more outrageous things. I'll give an example. He made a speech a few months ago, and he made the comment. He said, everybody knows that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. Now, he said this in front of probably 1,200 people. I wonder how many of those 1,200 actually knew that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. I would say no one, because to anyone's knowledge, it has never been proven, documented that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. I was a debater in high school and in college. One of the courses that I took was rhetorical theory. It's basically learning how to use language as a form of, if you will, propaganda to sell your argument. When I listened to what he said, it occurred to me that is classic propaganda tool. Here's what I mean. If you say something everybody knows, but everybody doesn't know, and no one in the audience is willing to stand up and say, no, sir, I don't know. Why don't you tell me how I should know that? If no one does that, everyone sits there and they nods. How come? Because everybody wants to act like, oh, yeah, I knew that. Of course I did. It is a tool that we need to push back on. And when someone says everybody knows whatever that everybody knows is supposed to be, we say, no, we don't know that. Why don't you school us? Why don't you give us some information and give us the footnotes so that we can look it up? Because actually, nobody here knows that because it's preposterous. We've got to answer the folly with fact.
Now, some of the preposterous statements that have really caught a lot of wind since October 7th have been the charges of war crimes against Israel, charges of genocide against Israel. And we've seen that play itself out in the International Criminal Court and elsewhere. And I wanted to know from your view and with regard to U.S. policy, how do these charges and arrest warrants issued against Prime Minister Netanyahu for genocide, how does that affect America and other countries' abilities to defend themselves?
I'm very proud of the United States. We have put sanctions on people like Francesca Albanese, one of the most horrible voices in the world today. We have also declared that the ICC is a rogue organization. The U.S. has no part of it, and we have put sanctions on people associated with the ICC and the ICJ. We will continue to do that, and I think that is the right course for the U.S. When we hear ridiculous allegations, Israel is a genocidal nation, I simply say, really? Then they are really, really bad at it. They're the worst at this that has ever been attempted in history. Because if Israel was genocidal, they could have taken all of Gaza down in about 2.5 hours. Last summer, we saw what Israel is capable of. They took on a nation 10 times its size, not only in population, but many, many times over its size geographically, and they kicked their ever-loving rear ends in the space of 12 days, didn't lose a single airplane, a single pilot, or a single soldier. And they did that. If they wanted to commit genocide, do you think they could do it in the space of Gaza, which is the size of Las Vegas, Nevada? Of course they could have. They didn't. Why? Because they're not a genocidal nation. It's ridiculous to say that of them.
Glad you referenced the 12-day war with Iran. And obviously, we know what is looming large over the elephant in the room, so to speak.
We do? See, there you go. Everybody knows. So
everybody knows. It's in the news. But because this is an anti-Semitism conference, I think that we should talk about Iran and how the Ayatollahs are the worst violent anti-Semites in the world today. And how do we make that case to the world and the American people?
We got to remind the world that basically many, many plates of poison are being served by Hamas, the Houthis, by Hezbollah. But all of those plates of poison came out of the same kitchen, Tehran. And if you want to stop the poison, you can change the menu, but it's better to burn the kitchen down and not let them serve those plates anymore.
Many haters of Israel are charging that the United States takes a lot of heat for their support of Israel. And people around the world think that if they support Israel, that they will take heat from others. But actually, what we see here in Israel is that people hate Israel because Israel is an ally and supports the United States. And particularly, we see in Iran, they've always talked about the little Satan and the big Satan. And the big Satan's not Israel. Right? So maybe we can talk a little bit about Israel's support for America, Israel's being the installation of the West here in the Middle East, and why that's such a big threat to some of the players in the region.
As a U.S. ambassador to Israel, my primary job is to bring the message of America to Israel. But a part of that job is also to bring our relationship and the value of the partnership between the U.S. and Israel back to America. Because a lot of Americans may hear this nonsense. Why are we doing so much for Israel? They don't do anything for us. To which I want to say, really? Then maybe you should educate yourself. Do you like your cell phone? If you don't like Israel, get rid of your cell phone. You wouldn't have it without Israel, some of the technology. You like car navigation? Do you like medical treatments that have saved the lives of some of your relatives? Well, thank God for Hadassah Medical in Jerusalem or Sheba Medical in Tel Aviv, without which their research and their extraordinary technological advances in oncology and gastroenterology have saved the lives of some of the people that you love. Israel does more for the United States than most Americans will ever understand. And one thing we must remind people, every enemy of Israel is an enemy of the United States. You indeed are the appetizer But we have always been the entree. 47 years, Iran has always in the same sentence said, death to Israel and death to America. It is the American flag they put on their buildings and cause their people to march over and stomp on going in to let America know how much they hate us. Well, we need to be very clear that our partnership with Israel is to our benefit. Our abandonment of Israel, our acting like we don't want to be a partner to Israel, is to our ever-loving detriment, and it is only opening a door to these crazed people, not the people themselves, but the leadership, the regime of Iran, that for 47 years has taunted, tortured, and done more to sponsor the horrific things that have killed more Americans than any other group on the entire planet.
The president of the United States likes to keep everybody on their feet with his statements to the media. You've watched the president closely. You've been in the room at some of the most important, consequential meetings on policy, particularly with related to the Middle East. Tell me how you think that people here should interpret the president's statements, because one day he can make a very strong statement, the next day he can make a very soft statement, and we're trying to figure out, how do you interpret the president's statements?
Well, let me remind you, Alex, that the first thing I do every day, because the president, as you know, is famous for firing people on Twitter. The first thing I do each morning is I read his Twitter feed to see if I still have a job. So let me be very careful how I answer this, lest I wake up in the morning and I read that it's time to pack up and go back. Selena Zito, who is a wonderful writer in the U.S., has one of the most brilliant statements back in the first term for President Trump. And she said, always take President Trump seriously, but not necessarily literally. And I think that's a good persuasion. I tell people to understand President Trump, recognize that he is the ultimate pragmatist. He is not a political person like you've ever known before. He does not speak the language of ideology that most people are used to when they hear political people speak. In other words, most all politicians operate on the horizontal, left versus the right, and you judge a person by where they are on that spectrum, how far left, how far right. People who live in that genre of politics will limit their solutions to whatever ideology they've ascribed to. So they say, I can only follow policies that are right of center. Or maybe they say, I can only follow things left of center. President Trump does not see things horizontally. He sees them vertically. He asks two questions for everything put before him. Will it work, and will it make things better? And if it will work and make things better, but it lands a little left of center, he may go there because he's not horizontal. He's vertical. He does not start his every decision process only within the box of right of center. And that's what makes him not only the most effective president in my lifetime and the most amazing president in my lifetime, perhaps in all of American history, but also the most consequential president when it comes to making the very difficult decisions on things like the Middle East and our foreign policies. Because he doesn't say, okay, what is it that we've done for the past 50 years? It's never worked. Let's just keep doing that. Let's put some more oil on that machinery and maybe it will work. He says, if it hasn't worked in this length of time, why are we continuing to do it? Throw it out and start on something better. It's why I love the guy, and I think he's the best president we could possibly have right now.
Thank you so much for this amazing interview with Mr. Mike Huckabee and Tamir Morag. We really appreciate this interview and sharing your thoughts about this. What's next for Hamas? And what's going to happen in Gaza? Well, Mr. Mike Huckabee made it very clear that there's not going to be any forceful relocation of any Gazans to somewhere else. But if they want to leave, they will be able to leave. Have we thought about this during the war time? During the 2-year war since October 7, 2023, the fact that the Gazans, the Palestinians, were not allowed to leave their land that they were living. Any other war zone, when war breaks out, the civilians are able to just leave and go to somewhere safe. We know millions left the Ukraine for a safer haven, waiting for the war to end and either choose to come back or not, but at least being given the option. But the Gazans, the Palestinians, the 2 million of them that were there, what was astonishing is not only they couldn't leave, but Hamas at gunpoint would not let them leave. What's even more astonishing is that the fellow Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt shut their borders. They wouldn't allow anyone coming into Egypt. And no other Arab country offered to take refugees from Gaza and resettle them, at least during the wartime. You wonder, the world was so concerned about the plight of the poor Palestinians in Gaza, but yet no one ever offered to take them into shelter out of harm's way. Have you ever questioned or wondered why that was the case? Well, we could go back a little bit in history. If we want to know what's going to happen to Gaza, we need to learn from history. On August 15, 2005, 21 years ago, every single Israeli was evacuated from Gaza. Israel was living there literally for thousands of years. Gaza was part of Israel. And up until 2005, Israel had settlements, had neighborhoods, had synagogues, had cemeteries, built an industry of greenhouses. They perfected an amazing type of vegetation growing, these hypoallergenic greenhouses. Just absolutely an incredible, beautiful industry. And then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, former general, made the hardest decision of his life, which I'm sure he's turning over in his grave now, of what he felt he had to do. And he thought that land for peace would work. And he falsely thought that by giving up our holy land to our enemy is going to bring us peace. And therefore he ordered, once again, the evacuation, the expulsion of every single Jew out of Gaza, that not one Jew would be left in Gaza. Just like what Hitler wanted to do with Europe, to make a Judenrein. Gaza was free. Not one Jew was left behind. Not only in the living, but even the cemeteries, all the bodies had to be exhumed and transported to Israel. What did we do? We gave this beautiful holy land, a coastal city, to our enemies with the hopes. Now you have the opportunity. You've been screaming for 6 decades that you want statehood, you want a homeland. Here you have a beautiful coastal city that you can turn into your homeland, to your state. You could turn it into whatever you wanted to do. The dreams are yours. Israel had zero presence there. And people talk about occupation. There was no occupation. There was not one Israeli there after 2005. They had the potential, the opportunity to turn this Gaza Strip into a French Riviera. They could have built a medical structure. They could have built schools. They could have built shopping centers, housing, parks, resorts. They could have turned the whole Gaza into this thriving, beautiful, like a French Riviera. Look what United Emirates have done. Look what Qatar has done. They could have done the exact same thing. Look at Dubai. They could have done the exact same thing. And the world poured in billions of dollars. And what happened? The billions of dollars went in unchecked. And instead of investing it for the plight of the 2 million Palestinians that were there, and investing in them and giving them a good educational system, not teaching them about that their whole life is about killing Jewish people and Israelis, giving them a real education, giving them a real medical system they can rely on, giving them transportation, giving them housing, giving them food, giving them opportunities, industry, etc. They took the billions of dollars and they invested it in turning Gaza into the biggest terrorist state of all time. They built a subterranean system larger than the New York subway system. I'm from New York, so I know exactly how vast the New York subway system is. This was 400 miles of subterranean tunnels, below tunnels, below tunnels. Imagine the amount of concrete and engineering that it took to go to build those subterranean terrorist tunnels, where they could have invested that. in above ground, in housing and medicine, education, and turning Gaza into a beautiful, thriving country. So here for 20 years, they consciously chose to suppress their people and to torture them and to twist their brains and turning them into a death cult that eventually ended on October 7, when 3,000 of these Hamas-grown Palestinians turned terrorists breached the Israeli border of Gaza and murdered so savagely the most hideous type of tortures, pains, rape and suffering and burning, beheading of young, middle-aged, elder people, just the most hideous types of tortures that we haven't seen since the Holocaust happened on October 7. And they proudly say that they would do it again and again and again and again. What is going to happen with Gaza now? Well, this is a watershed moment in history. This is an opportunity to learn from the past. What we have learned is evil cannot reign. Evil must be eradicated. The Hamas presence in Gaza has to end. Not only be disarmed, has to end. There's only one way World War II ended. And those were two words: unconditional surrender. We know that what happened in Berlin when Britain demanded unconditional surrender, and we know what Britain had to do to bring about the unconditional surrender in Dresden. We know exactly what happened, how many hundreds of thousands of people had to die, but eventually unconditional surrender. And we know what happened in Japan with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How did World War end? It was unconditional surrender. If we don't have unconditional surrender, then our enemy is still going to be there. It's like a cancer. If you don't get rid of every cell, a subcell, it has its opportunity to regroup and rebuild itself. We have spent 2 years fighting this guerrilla warfare. For Israel, that's such a small country, smaller than New Jersey in real estate. It had to fight a war that it was not designed to. It has done 6-day wars, Yom Kippur wars, war in the north, but for weeks, for days, but not for years. This was a war that Israel executed with the greatest morals and ethics possible. Israel had the means and the ability to end it on October 8th. Within 2 hours, they could have eliminated the whole Gaza, just like what the Britain did to Berlin, and the war would have been over. Yes, we would have lost the hostages, unfortunately, but we wouldn't have lost another 1,000 soldiers that we lost. Israel could have done that. It had the means, it had the right and the ability to do it, but it did not. It rather chose to spare the lives of the 2 million civilians that are there. Albeit enemies of the Jewish state, they provided them with food, with electricity, with gas. And before every bombing, before every operation, Israel notified the neighborhoods of civilians to get out of harm's way. No one's saying that it was easy, but it was a war that no other country would have been as conscientious and careful about civilian casualties. At West Point, all the generals are still amazed. They cannot put the numbers together. There's no other war recorded in history where the ratio of civilian casualties to the combatants. It's because Israel took the blow. Israel lost 1,000 of its young soldiers just to prevent the civilians from dying, whereas Hamas did everything possible to kill as many civilians of their own, using them as human shields. And this is the evil that we're up against. And this is exactly what Mr. Mike Huckabee is saying. And he believes our president, Donald J. Trump, said, help is on the way, help is on the way. We don't know what's happening behind closed doors, but we are praying. And that's what you and I can do. We can pray to God Almighty that God gives Donald J. Trump, our president, and its allies, and the government of Israel, the opportunity to free the 90 million Iranian civilians that are suffering right now, to bring a fresh air of peace to the Middle East by annihilating this evil regime, this death squad, this death cult of radical Islamists, jihadis, eradicate them forever so that Iran can be free and that Israel and Iran can once again become allies just like they were before 1979. As Palvani, if he's going to be elected democratically with a new government, with a full democracy, and if he's brought in, the Crown Prince Reza said the very first thing he is going to do is to renew diplomatic relations with Israel and the United States. This is so attainable. It's so close by. We could taste it. Let's see this watershed moment in history happen in real life. God bless you. God loves you.